Okay, so once we have now discussed about this planning stage. So what happens is the next stage is actually the performance stage. Now what actually happens at the performance stage? This performance stage is where the actual audit takes place. This performance stage is where the actual audit takes place. Now what exactly do you mean by performance stage? So for this performance stage, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to refer to ISA 500. I'm going to refer to ISA 500. And what is this ISA 500? This is actually about the audit evidence. What does ISA 500 says? ISA 500 says that the auditor's responsibility is to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence such that he could provide reasonable assurance on the financial statements. So basically, this is something that's very important that you need to understand, which is whenever we talk about the performance stage of the audit, what happens is you have planned out, you've identified the risk areas of the audit. And once you have identified the risk areas of the audit, so you have planned the responses towards the audit. Now what happens is you have got the performance stage. And what exactly do you mean by performance stage? So the performance stage is where the actual field work takes place, where the actual audit is performed. So with respect to this performance, what happens is ISA 500 and the series of ISA 500 is mainly applicable at this specific performance stage. Now let's try to understand what exactly happens at this. So ISA 500 mentions that audit evidence, which is that every auditor, what he should do is that he should gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence such that he could provide reasonable assurance on the financial statement. So it is actually the responsibility of the auditor to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to provide reasonable assurance on the financial statement. Now, I'll talk about this sufficiency, I'll talk about this appropriateness, but let me first explain to you how the audit operates. Basically what happens is you as an auditor would have identified the risk. You as an auditor would have identified the risk. Now, after the identification of the risk, what happens is that you have to actually, because you see what happens is the audit is performed on a test basis. The audit is performed on a test basis. So that means we have to draw a sample. And we have to draw a sample of transactions. And once we have drawn the sample of transactions, so we have to perform our procedures onto those transactions. We have to perform our procedures onto those specific transactions. So remember, how do things operate? It's actually like this, that you have performed the risk assessment. Once you have performed the risk assessment, then what you actually do is that you actually extract a sample of transactions, and on those sample of transactions you perform the audit procedures. Now what exactly are the procedures that we perform? So the first thing that we do is that we perform the test of controls. The first thing that we do is that we perform the test of controls, which are commonly known as TOCs. They're commonly known as TOCs. What are they known as? TOCs. Okay, so basically how it goes about is we have to perform the test of controls. What is this test of controls? It's basically we test the internal controls. We test internal controls, whether these internal controls are relevant, are reliable, are operating efficiently or not. So that's what we do. Efficient, and then are they effective or not? So we perform a test of controls That is, we test the internal controls that are prevalent in the organization. And once we have tested, because what happens is that there are various internal controls which are prevalent in the organization. So with respect to those internal controls which are prevalent in the organizations, you have to check, you have to perform the procedures on those internal controls to check that your internal controls are actually majorly sufficient, which is that are they good enough? Are they good enough? And at the same time, effectiveness. Are they effective? Are they being applied? Are they being implemented? So that's what you have to focus upon, which is whenever you perform the test of controls, it's actually you're testing the internal controls. What are you doing? You're testing the internal controls for what? That are they sufficient enough? Are they effective or not? Now, the next thing is once you have performed the test of control, what's the next thing that you have to do? So what we do is that we see whether the test of controls which are being performed, what is our take from the controls. If we realize this thing that the controls are, if the controls are sufficient, if the controls are effective, which other way around means that the controls are strong. So if the controls are strong, then what happens is we go for less amount of substantive testing. If the controls are strong, what we do is that we go for less amount of substantive testing. But if the controls are weak, then what we do is that we go for extensive substantive testing. What we do is that we go for extensive substantive testing. So I'm repeating it again. What happens is the first thing that you have to look for is basically that what exactly is happening with respect to the controls. If the controls are strong, then the substantive testing will be low. If the controls are weak, then there is going to be an extensive substantive testing. So the first step that you do is that you perform a test of controls. You test the controls which are prevalent in any organization, and you test them for being sufficient, for being effective. The next thing that we do with respect to these controls is, that we perform substantive testing. Now, what exactly are these substantive testing? So let's try to understand this substantive testing. Whenever we talk about the substantive testing is actually like this. There is one thing which is called substantive analytical procedures. And there is another thing which is called test of details. So whenever we talk about performing the substantive procedures, so the substantive procedures could actually be analytical procedures. The substantive procedures could be the test of details. Now, what exactly are the analytical procedures? What exactly are the test of details? So let me explain to you. With respect to the analytical procedures, we have got ISA 520, which actually explains to you what the analytical procedures are. And when we talk about the test of details, so I'm going to mention a single mnemonic which is going to be used for the entire substantive, which is you could use the mnemonic of AEI square OU. AEI square OU, where A actually refers to the analytical procedure. A refers to the analytical procedure. And then this E refers to the external confirmation. E refers to external confirmation. Then I refers to the inquiry. And then another I actually refers to the inspection. Then we have got the observation. Furthermore, we have got the recalculation. We have got the recalculation. This U is actually for the recalculation. I'm repeating it again. This U is actually for the recalculation. So what happens is there is this recalculation. So what we do is that whenever we perform the substantive testing would include AEI square OU, where A is going to be the analytical procedures and EI square OU would be the external confirmation, the inquiry, the inspection, observation, and recalculation. The observation, external confirmation, inquiry, inspection, observation, and recalculation. Okay, let's try to discuss each one of them one by one, that what exactly do you mean by this. Because you see what happens is whenever you are performing the procedures, so I'm going to discuss about analytical procedures in a bit of detail, but let me discuss with you the other aspect. If I talk about the external confirmation, what exactly do you mean by external confirmation? This is confirming something from outsider. Like for example, when you give the customer confirmation letter, so we are talking about the external confirmation. So with respect to the external confirmation, you have already studied at the F8 level that you do know about this thing, that there is this receivable circularization. This customer confirmation would actually mean the receivable circularization, where what we do is that we send a letter to our customers to confirm from them if they are okay, if the balances that are mentioned in the financial statements are okay or not, or if there is any discrepancy, if there is any dispute, then the customer can actually highlight this. The second thing is, there could be the bank confirmation also. There could be the bank confirmation also. And what exactly do you mean by this bank confirmation? The bank confirmation is like that you send the confirmation letters to the bank to confirm from them that what exactly are the balances. It's just a method of actually confirming a figure from the outsider. Or maybe you could have the supplier confirmation, supplier balance confirmation, etc. So these are the various things that we actually do as a procedure. So whenever we talk about this test of details, so one of them is the external confirmation. The second one of them is actually about the inquiry. And when we talk about the inquiry is with respect to, you have to inquire from the staff, you have to inquire from the management, or you have to maybe inquire from the customer, you maybe have to inquire from the supplier, because there are various things that you have to confirm from the entity's perspective. From the perspective of performing your audit, you might have to confirm a lot of things. So it's just that obtaining an inquiry from those various people, like the staff, the customer, the management, suppliers, etc., etc. So this is what you have to do. Let's move a bit forward. And the next thing is basically the inquiry, and then you have got the inspection. Now, when we talk about the concept of inspection, so what actually happens is that with respect to the inspection, you actually go about like this. Basically, the concept of inspection is that there are various things, like for example, the title deeds. If there is any asset, any property, so you might as an auditor go on inspecting the title deeds just to have a confirmation that whether they actually do have a right to this specific asset or not, whether they do actually own this asset or not. Okay, so you've got the title deeds with respect to the assets which you inspect. Then at times what happens is the board of directors meeting minutes that you inspect at times. You inspect the AGM or any other EOGM minutes to obtain a confirmation with respect to whatever that you are trying to confirm. So I'm repeating that as an auditor, what you have to do is that you have to perform the external confirmation, because that helps you collect details. You have to perform inquiry. Why? Because that helps you collect details. You have to perform this. You have to perform this inspection of the documents. Why? Because this also helps you this also helps you obtain the details. So these are the various test of details that we do. Then we have got the observation, and then we have got the recalculation. Now, let me explain to you that what exactly do you mean by this observation. You see, what happens is when you observe things happening, when you observe things happening, when you stand at the organization's floor, so what happens is you get to know a lot about how the organization is operating, how the organization is working. So basically what happens as part of your audit, when you have to get into the details of things, when you have to reconfirm the evidence that you have got, so you might actually have to rely upon the observations also. So you might actually have to rely upon the observations also. That's what you have to do. And lastly, what happens is, there is this fifth thing, which is basically called the recalculation. What is it? It's actually termed as recalculation. Now, what is it? I'm repeating it again. It's actually termed as recalculation. Now, what happens is there are a lot of numbers in the company's financial statements which need to be reconfirmed, which need to be verified. For example, depreciation. Especially when there is a mid-year acquisition, because you have to make sure that the company has ensured that they have performed time proportionate depreciation or not. When there is this revaluation, so the revaluation would also involve you performing the recalculation. The objective of the recalculation is to have a confirmation that basically what happens is that you are ensuring that the numbers shown are correct and accurate. So what happens is usually this recalculations is whenever the numbers are involved, even if the simple numbers are involved or even if the complex numbers are involved, this recalculation enhances your confidence in those numbers. This recalculation enhances your confidence in those numbers. So if I go back and if I talk about this ISA 500 audit evidence, so what actually happens is that the auditor's objective is to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. How would the auditor gather the evidence? The first thing that the auditor would do is that he would perform the test of controls. If he feels that the test of controls are strong, then his reliance on controls would be more and he would perform less substantive testing. But if he thinks that the test of controls, if the controls are weak, so what is actually going to happen is that this auditor is going to go on perform extensive substantive testing. And what do you mean by substantive testing? So the substantive testing is of two types. This includes the analytical procedures and this includes the test of details. The test of details would be these external confirmation, inquiry, inspection, observation, and recalculation. I mentioned that this substantive procedures could be remembered using this mnemonic, which is AEI square OU. You can remember it using this mnemonic of AEI square OU. Then you've got this analytical procedures. And what exactly do you mean by these analytical procedures? So I'm going to talk about them and I'm going to discuss about the analytical procedures also. It's actually ISA 520, which covers up the analytical procedures. It's actually ISA 520, which covers up the analytical procedures. Now, what exactly are these analytical procedures? Let's try to have a discussion about them. The analytical procedures could actually be made up of two things. What is this? Number one of them is called trend analysis. The other one of them is termed as the ratio analysis. And the third one of them is termed as reasonableness test. Reasonableness test. Now, what happens with respect to this ratio analysis, this trend analysis, reasonableness test? What are these analytical procedures? So I'm going to explain to you. You see, what happens is, as we know that there are three stages of the audit, which is the planning stage, then there is this performance stage, and lastly there is this review stage. So it's mandatory at the planning and the review stage, and over here it's optional. It's a choice. It depends upon you as an entity, you as an auditor, whether you wish to perform the analytical procedures or you don't want to perform the analytical procedures. So it's not a mandatory item here. It's actually up to you as an auditor whether you wish to perform these or whether you don't want to perform these. Now let's try to discuss, let's try to understand. Basically what happens is that, let's say if I talk about the trend analysis, assume that I established that from 2018, 2019 and 2020. I could establish that the sales have grown by 14% here. The sales have grown by 25% here. The COGS have actually grown by, let's say, 8% here, and they have grown by 18% here. The net profit has grown by, let's say, 10%, and the net profit has grown by the net profit has actually grown by, let's say, 20%. Now what has happened is, what we have simply done is we have used the entity's numbers from the financials, and on the basis of these numbers what I'm going to do is that I'm going to tell you, I'm going to guide you how these various procedures are performed. So let's just try to see. First of all, the sales of the entity is increasing by 14%, is increasing by 25%. And if I compare them with the industry, if I compare with the competitor, etc., so I could see that the industry and the competitors, what they have achieved is they have achieved an 8% growth here. They've achieved a 12% growth here. Now, so if I have got such a situation where the industry has achieved a different type of growth and my company has achieved a different type of growth, so what am I going to do? I'm going to obviously inquire what has happened. What is it that you have done? What is it that the others haven't been able to do? So probably from the audit perspective, I could actually identify a risk here, which could be an issue with the cutoff, which could be an issue that the fictitious sales have been recognized. So there could be multiple things that could be done. It could be that maybe the cutoff issue prevails. It could be maybe that the fictitious sales issue prevails. So there could be anything with respect to this that is basically going to be happening. Okay, similarly, let's move a bit forward. And what we are going to talk about now is that the next thing is you've got this COGS. Now, what could probably happen is the COGS has increased by 8%, whereas your sales was increasing by 14%. COGS has increased by COGS has increased by what? COGS has increased by 18%, whereas the sales have actually increased by 25%. Now, what does it indicate? This probably indicates that either there is a problem with the sales or there is a problem with the expenses. Either they are understated or there is probably a misclassification. Either they are understated or there is probably a misclassification, that the expenses which were to be recognized in COGS are instead recognized into the operating expenses. There could be anything. So basically what happens is, what you do is that whenever you perform the trend analysis, so you see what happens over a period of time. What happens is you see what happens over a period of time. How do things operate? How do things move? Now, the next thing is basically the ratio analysis. So how do the ratio analysis operate and how does ratio analysis helps us with this analytical? So let me explain to you. Okay, so let me explain to you with respect to the ratio analysis. So when I talk about these ratio analysis, so I would actually tell you that the ratio analysis is actually going to be like this. That for example, if we have got a receivable collection period, what does the receivable collection period shows you? It shows you that how many days are your customers taking in order to settle the debts. So for example, if in the previous year, let's say in 2019, your receivable collection period was, let's say, 30 days. I'm repeating it again. In 2019, your receivable collection period was 30 days. And now in 2020, this receivable collection period has increased to 50 days. So if this has increased to 50 days, so what is it indicating? I'm repeating, what is it indicating? This is actually indicating, this is actually telling you that the customers are taking long to pay. And this would mean that there is actually going to be a bad debt risk. This would mean there is actually going to be a bad debt risk. Now, when there is actually going to be a bad debt risk, so that means the allowance for bad debt, that means allowance for bad debt needs to be updated. And if allowance for bad debt is not updated, then the receivable balance is going to be misstated. So what happens is whenever you perform this ratio analysis identifies that what is actually going to be an issue, what is going to be the risky area, because this is what analytical procedure helps you. Now this is indicating that the provision for bad debt should be updated. So the provision for bad debts, if they are not updated, they would lead to the misstatement of receivable. They would lead to the misstatement of receivables. For example, you've got the inventory holding period. You established the inventory holding period. You figured out that the inventory holding period was, let's say, 30 days. And now the inventory holding period has increased to, let's say, 45 days. So if the inventory holding period has increased from 30 days to 45 days, what does it actually mean? This increase in the inventory holding period indicates a slow moving inventory. So if it's a slow moving inventory, this is what it is indicating. So that means that that entity, what it needs to do is that the inventory needs to be written down. Inventory needs to be written off, because what happens is that if you're not going to write off the inventory is actually going to be misstated. If you are not going to write off the inventory is actually going to be misstated. So this is something that is actually going to happen. Yes, you can mention about IS2 also. So the inventory will be misstated because you have to record the inventory at the lower of cost or NRV. You have to record the inventory at the lower of cost or NRV. So basically what happens is when you calculate the various ratios, you get to understand that what is happening, that what exactly is the area where there could be a problem with respect to the financial statements. And as an auditor, you could actually divert more and more procedures toward them. So what happens is, generally speaking, when we perform the calculations, so this is something that we actually figure out. So if I'm talking about the analytical procedure, it would include the trend analysis, it would include the ratio analysis, and it would also include the reasonableness test. Now, Let's talk about the reasonableness test. So what is this reasonableness test? What actually happens is that there are multiple, when I talk about this reasonableness test, so let me confirm that there are actually multiple um, that there are multiple comparisons that you can do with respect to an entity's financials. For example, you have been auditing the oil and gas giant, and you know that how much drilling costs do they incur in a year. And then you are actually auditing a 10th ranked firm of oil and gas, and you realize that their drilling cost is greater than this leader, that's greater than this market leader. So what are you going to do? You're going to say it doesn't actually make sense. Why? Because what happens is there is somebody who is a leader, market leader, who has got the highest, drilling facility, and that company's cost is basically lower than the cost of the 10th highest extracting company. So how is it possible? You've got the first ranked firm and you've got a 10th ranked firm. 10th ranked firm's drilling cost is higher than the first ranked firm. So this is actually not making sense. This does not pass the reasonableness test. So when we talk about the analytical procedure, this is what happens. So basically, whenever we are talking about the substantive procedures, so the substantive testing could be the analytical procedure and could be the test of details. So now going back to it. So what is the auditor's objective is to gather the sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. And how do they gather the audit evidence? Okay, let me repeat with respect to the reasonableness test. Just wait. The question with respect to the reasonableness test is, for example, you recently audited the #1 ranked oil and gas firm in your country, and you know their drilling cost. You know the cost of drilling that they incur during the whole of the year. And then you are auditing a firm which is the 10th ranked extraction firm in your country, and the drilling cost that they are incurring is greater than the drilling cost of the #1 firm. So what is actually that indicating? This is actually indicating that it can't happen. Either they are understating or they are overstating. So if you have audited this properly, so what is actually going to happen is that this cost is going to be not passing the reasonableness test, and you would raise inquiries onto the management that what is this happening? What is actually happening with respect to all of it? Now, so once you have performed these analytical procedures, so what happens is that these analytical procedures help you identify that if there is something wrong with the financials or anything. So that's also one of those things which helps you in order to gather the evidence. So lastly, with respect to this performance stage, what we do is that we try to gather the audit evidence which is sufficient and appropriate. And what exactly do we mean by the sufficiency? So the sufficiency actually means quantity. And when we talk about the appropriateness, so the appropriateness is actually your reliability and relevance. Now, let me discuss with you that what exactly do you mean by the reliability of the audit evidence. So if I talk about the reliability of the sufficient, if I talk about the appropriateness of the audit evidence, so the appropriateness of the audit evidence, as we mentioned, that it is actually going to be the relevance and at the same time reliability. So it's relevance plus reliability. Now, how is the reliability enhanced? Let's try to understand. So the reliability of the audit evidence is enhanced with respect to the five things. The five things which actually enhances the reliability, or other way around, you could say it enhances reliability, or other way around, you could say the quality of the evidence. Just wait. As I mentioned that as an auditor, you have to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. What exactly do you mean by sufficiency? So the sufficiency means quantity of the evidence. You know, you're performing the audit with selective transactions. So just like there is a rule for every specific sampling technique that the sample size should be reflective of the entire population, the same thing should happen here also. And with respect to the appropriateness of the audit evidence, what is going to happen? Let's try to understand. So the appropriateness of the audit evidence would mean relevant and reliable. Now, what is it that enhances the reliability? So let me explain to you this, that what enhances the reliability of the audit evidence. It's actually five things that enhance the reliability of the audit evidence. And what are those five things? The number one of them is okay. So I'm going to discuss about this relevance, but before this, let me discuss about reliability. You see, what happens is the reliability of the audit evidence would depend upon various things. These are five characteristics which enhances the quality of the audit evidence. Number one, it has to be externally confirmed. Now, what do you mean by externally confirmed? So let's try to understand this. Externally confirmed would actually mean, the externally confirmed would actually mean that this is somebody outside the organization has confirmed whatever the evidence you've gathered. Like for example, we get the receivable confirmation. Receivable confirmation is a good quality audit evidence as compared to reconciliation of the receivable on your own. Secondly, auditor generated, because at times what happens is you rely upon expert, you rely upon the internal auditor. So the evidence which is not generated by you is not that high quality as compared to the evidence which is generated by you yourself. Then there is this strong internal controls. Now, what exactly do you mean by strong internal controls? Try to understand this. Whenever we talk from the perspective of the organization, if there are strong controls, the strong internal controls, that means that the reliability of the evidence is enhanced. Original documents. What do you mean by this original documents? Let's try to understand. The original documents would actually mean that if you have got copies, if you have got scanned documents, the evidence is not that reliable as compared to the auditor inspecting the original documents. That's more reliable. And lastly, the written form. So the oral evidence is something which could be forgotten. The oral evidence is something which could be changed, which could be something that the client may not actually stand by its words later on. But with respect to the written form of evidence, it's going to be something that is there, that is going to be there, that is going to be there for long. So it's not going to be an issue with respect to the written form of the evidence. So what happens is that you as an auditor would try to gather the evidence which is sufficient and appropriate. Sufficiency is about gathering sufficient quantity, and appropriateness is relevant and reliable. Reliable I have explained. The relevance is what? Relevance is, I'm sorry, the relevance actually would mean that you get the confirming appropriate assertion. Now, what exactly do you mean by confirming the appropriate assertion? Try to understand this thing. For example, that you wish to confirm the existence of a property, plant, and equipment. And what you do is that the procedure that you perform to confirm the existence is you inspect the invoice. If you are going to inspect the invoice, then what is actually going to happen is that this is not going to be a relevant evidence. Why? Because inspecting the invoice doesn't show you existence. Existence is better confirmed by physically inspecting. By physically inspecting the asset, that is actually going to confirm the existence. I'm repeating it again. What do you mean by relevant evidence? So the relevance of the evidence is that you try to satisfy the relevant assertion which you are trying to satisfy. That is, for example, I have taken this example of existence of PP. The assertion is existence. You are trying to verify the existence. If you are trying to verify the existence, what would you do? One of them is you could inspect the invoice. The inspection of the invoice would just show you that how much was the cost. It can't confirm to you that the assets actually does exist. How would we confirm it? When you would physically inspect it. How would you confirm it? When you would physically inspect it. How would you confirm? When you would physically inspect it. So basically, the relevance of the audit evidence is that you have to perform the appropriate procedures to actually satisfy the relevant assertions. So what we have done is we have actually gone through this specific next stage also, which is the performance stage. We've gone through the performance stage of the audit also, and the performance stage of the audit was that we had to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence such that we are able to express an opinion.